Hey guys, this is going to be my review of The Undoing, episode 5, and the episode is called Trial by Fury. And another solid episode. This series is now sort of clicking along quite nicely. The one thing I will address straight away, which is quite interesting, because I think as far as who may have actually committed the murder, this episode did an interesting thing, and I'm not quite sure if it's a great thing or like a sort of a misfire, and it might just be my thing the way I read it anyway. But at the start of the episode, I was convinced that the sort of sting in the tail was that Henry, the son, was going to turn out to be the murderer, because I figured, he probably heard about the affair Jonathan had with Elena somehow, and so that would be his motivation. And the reason I sort of had this thought was because the episode opens with the interview from last week, like the sort of closing parts of it, and obviously Jonathan's asked in that interview, well, if it's not you, do you have any idea who might have committed the murder? And the big cliffhanger is him saying, well, as a matter of fact, I think I might do now. Now, it's a bit strange because no one seems to actually ask him who it is in this episode, or who he thinks it is. You would have thought that would have been an obvious question from someone, but you don't actually hear anyone actually ask him, which obviously is a bit weird. But anyway, my line of thinking is that we see Henry watching the interview on his like whatever it's meant to be, his like phone screen in or tablet or whatever the device is. I think it's meant to be a phone. He's watching it like in the schoolyard, and there's a certain like moment and like intensity to it when his father says that line, and it's just the way Henry is like watching it and acting all sort of like strange about it as he was watching. And at one point the teacher comes up to him and kind of says, Henry, you're alright, and he kind of just nods, but he's clearly a bit sort of perplexed. So that in a way sort of set it up as, well, I think it's going to be Henry. Now obviously it's only episode 5, so there's a few more to go. So, but then it seemed to obviously not come back to that as such. But then at the end of this episode, the like cliffhanger sort of sets it up for you to think, well, it is Henry, or at least he's got possession of the murder weapon. The murder weapon, we find out early in this episode, was a hammer, because that's kind of in the trial. We actually see like the other attorney on the other side like using the hammer to like kind of say, he did this, sort of really heightening the drama and kind of painting a vivid picture in the jury's mind. And then at the end of the episode, there's this cliffhanger where Grace finds a hammer of the same kind in Henry's like violin's case when she's looking through his room. And Henry wakes up and obviously sees that she's looking in there, so it's this big dramatic end. So I just thought it was interesting that my mind raced to Henry, and then certain things throughout the episode kind of made me question it, and then they went back to it again. But because this is only episode 5 and there's still 3 more to go, you do wonder if there's going to be another twist in the tale, or if they're going to somehow come up with an answer for why Henry's got the hammer, I should say. But in any case, this is an enjoyable episode again, and I think a lot of the strength with this show is like the satire and the stuff to do with the media and some of the dialogue, and just kind of how pretty it all looks. And I kind of think that's the appeal of the show more than the actual mystery. I'm sort of maybe predicting that because there's been so much teasing of who's actually done this murder and the whole mystery element. And I just wonder if it might be that sort of show where the actual reveal is kind of, oh, okay. not a lot to it, not much which is going to surprise or grab you, but then it may not matter, is what I'm saying. I think the other stuff is so enjoyable that then it might sort of carry the show in any case. But it'll be interesting to see what happens when we get to that reveal and if there is a twist in the tale come the end. But yeah, I did enjoy again some of the media stuff in this. Like there's this good sort of quote from someone like, when the father Franklin's watching like coverage of the trial on TV, and there's this funny little line from this woman who's saying, you know, as much as we like to think that we want to stick it to like the privilege, well, we actually don't. We like the circus sort of thing. So I thought that was a great sort of funny little line, and it sort of makes you think. I mean, yeah, in this modern like celebrity obsessed culture, do we actually, you know, that there definitely is a sense that we like to see like rich people get their like comeuppance and sort of fail, assuming that they're, you know, unlikable rich people in the first place. But at the same time, would it be a less interesting world if they weren't around, if they weren't in the media making like spectacles of themselves? And I'm not saying it then I feel that way, but there is that sense. So that's a good line. But I enjoyed the stuff in court in this episode. Again, I think Grace is a really, not Grace, sorry, I think Haley representing Jonathan is a really fascinating character, because in this you see, I think, how effective she is as an attorney, and we get like the opening arguments, and you obviously have the actress Elf to Kill and playing the other attorney and the other lawyer. She does a good job in commanding things in her opening statements, but yeah, Haley does a good job in just sort of creating doubt in people's minds over could it be Jonathan. And I think what I like about her in this episode is that she is very calm, very like level-headed in her arguments. Like she's not, because she is obviously quite a like cynical sort of lawyer, and we've seen the way she's been trying to get work on like the public image and stuff of Jonathan and Grace as a couple, and so in a way she's not like above using dirty tactics, but at the same time I think in the courtroom scenes in this episode she's quite level-headed, and she's actually kind of playing along by the book in some ways. She's just very sharp, very strong in her arguments, and she does bring a lot of doubt in on the other side. She does bring up the fact that it's always been assumed that Jonathan was the killer, because obviously there's strong evidence there, but it's not concrete, and there are other potential suspects like Fernando. And She even brings Grace into it at one point, and she later kind of backtracks, because when she talks to the detective when he's on the stand, he like brings her, like questions her on, you are you trying to make Grace a suspect, sort of thing, and or he says, well, actually you did, and she says, well, that's not what I was doing. Actually, I was just I was just raising the point. Then she could be considered a suspect that no one else had been. So I think actually that's a really clever point made by Haley in this episode, because when she's talking to the detective, she brings up the pictures that they have of Grace in the area, and because at first the detective doesn't talk about them, he just talks about like the pictures of Jonathan on the camera, and then she has to point them out. And she actually makes some good point, like picking holes in the case, because they talk about the forensic evidence that they have against Jonathan, that he was definitely in the apartment on the night, the fact that there's like a footprint of blood, and it's like his sort of matches his sort of footprint, and well, she's kind of Haley's kind of saying, well, couldn't it have been, because there's two people there, so it could have been like people coming in and out. It could have been Jonathan maybe fleeing the apartment, panicking, which kind of doesn't look that good, but she's obviously making the point. His whole story has been all along that he came back and found her dead, and then maybe, panicked and left the apartment. So sort of still. But anyway, Haley at least does a good job in creating doubt in the case and picking holes in some of the evidence. So she almost uses Grace at one point, which is like a surprise tactic, because they don't run it by Grace initially, and then there's this powerful exchange between her and Fernando, where Fernando like basically describes her as just, I can't remember the term he uses, but sort of dismisses her as just scum, and almost, yeah, just using the fact that someone had died, and yeah, just underhanded sort of lawyer sort of thing, and they go into the whole psychological aspect, and it's been brought up before that there was problems in the marriage with Fernando and Elena, and yeah, it's almost saying, have you seeked out psychiatric help? So they do sort of score some points in this episode, that being Haley on Jonathan's side. So things do start to look a bit more promising, although like there's still obviously strong evidence against Jonathan. But obviously their point of view is about creating like shadow of a doubt and all that kind of thing. And we get more about the family and how they're doing. Jonathan, or Henry I should say, is quite critical of Grace in this episode. She's quite strong. There's like this really awkward family dinner when they're just out at a restaurant, and again it sort of highlights what this like drama is all about in some ways, and it's just one of these like really well put together scenes where they're like awkwardly trying to talk about the situation. I think it's when they've come out of court, and you have obviously like the waiter and that come up to them, ask them what they want, and then you've got this agonizing sort of silence. It's almost like a stage play sort of thing, this awkward sort of pauses, and then when the waiter like comes back, there's like another like they've said something and then they've paused again. And I think the fact that you've got this waiter like coming back and forth, it sort of adds to like the tension. But yeah, Jonathan, or sorry, Henry again is really like strong against his mother. He's kind of like taking up for the father here and just saying, he made a mistake, but he's sorry. He would never do it again, and he's trying to get Grace to say that, because I think she said something like, this family, can maybe survive anything, or something to do with, if we get through this, we could survive anything. But Jonathan is, or sorry, Henry is trying to get her to say that. Then, yeah, if we get through this, if Dad wins the trial, then you can work at the marriage again. We can stay together. And Grace is just doesn't want to talk about it right now. This is not the time to talk about this. And it's quite right, obviously she shouldn't be forced into saying that, and it's all very awkward. Obviously, Jonathan has really screwed up in her book. But it's a good scene again, and there's some revelations in this episode. Once again, we find out that Henry has known actually about the affair for a while, which I think again sort of casts shades on him a bit. But we see him, he like tells Grace then he remembers seeing Jonathan and Elena, sort of like having a kiss and a hug, like once at school, and he's off in the distance. But the whole thing is that his father sees him. His father saw that Henry saw them, and he just sort of gave them away, or gives him a wave and sort of a smile. And again, this really makes Grace mad, because it's like, oh, you had this over our son, sort of thing, and just mad that they knew, and yeah, all the way back. But it's just one of these other sort of little reveals. But anyway, and yeah, there's just further digs at like Elena's personality, and yeah, she also asks, actually, was she on like psychiatric help and stuff like that. And the other big revelation in this episode is over, I think it was back in the first episode, or maybe the second, this sort of revelation from Jonathan's past, that he'd apparently been responsible for killing the family cat. It was either dog or cat, I can't remember which it was now. I sort of thought it was cat, but in any case, this sort of thing, that he'd been babysitting, and he'd sort of let the cat out, and cat/dog, whichever it was, and that it'd been killed. And that's why when Henry wanted a pet, he sort of refused. Well, it gets revealed in this episode that that's not quite accurate. It was actually more sort of darker than that. The truth is that it was actually his sister who died in that incident when he was babysitting, and basically then he got distracted. He wasn't keeping an eye on her, and she ran into the road, and got hit by a car and died. And it caused this big rift with the family for all these years, and basically they've never forgiven Jonathan. So that all comes out, and we hear also then he hasn't seen his mother since the wedding, since obviously he got married to Grace, and Grace has always wondered why they've never really spent a lot of time with his mother, and why that's never been a thing. So she tries to contact her, and eventually, like, Jonathan's mother contacts Grace by Skype. It's near the end of the episode, and she reveals all that stuff. And I think Jonathan's psychiatric state is just called into question in this episode as well. I think this maybe isn't that significant. I think it's maybe just more stuff to make the audience think, he is kind of unbalanced maybe, so it could lead credence to this idea that he might snap and, could kill someone. But basically the mother just tells Grace that that he's never really come to terms with his sister dying, that he's always been in denial, he's always, not allowed himself to grieve. He's never apologised, she said, because obviously she's very critical of him and saying he should have apologised. He's never shown remorse, he's never grieved. And so I think that stuff is just adding to, like, the stuff against Jonathan, that the fact that he's never sought like therapy or anything like that, and he's never seemingly come to terms with his sister dying. So is that really healthy, and does that bring into question his state of mind? So that's the episode. Pretty good episode again. I enjoyed it a fair bit. Some pretty meaty stuff in there, and I'm looking forward to the next episode. So do let me know what your thoughts are on episode 5. There's just a few more to go, as I said. You can also look out for more reviews of Star Trek Discovery. I've been reviewing that on the channel as well. And also the second series of His Dark Material, a BBC HBO show. And also just coming up over the month ahead, because of course it is the festive season, I will be doing lots of special live streams, special TV movie watches, Christmas themed live streams, and probably some reviews of Christmas type films or TV shows, that sort of stuff. So a lot to look forward to over the next month, but I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.